The whole valley had called him mad for 3 winters. James Bellamy and his wall of live beehives. They said he'd freeze. They said he'd be stung to death. But on this night, a mother's knock would rewrite everything. The winter of 1894 was the coldest in living memory. Even the strongest livestock froze solid where they stood.
Mama, I can't feel my hands.
Shh, little one. Mama won't let you go. Only the mad beekeeper's cabin has warmth. Harrison would rather let Tom die than ask for help, but I won't.
She pulled her shawl tight and stepped out into the blizzard. The wind clawed at her skin, but that faint orange glow pulled her forward. Finally, her frozen hand touched the cold iron knocker. She lifted it and brought it down with the last of her strength. 3 winters before that desperate knock, James Bellamy was a man who spoke to his bees more than his neighbors.
Easy, Sage. They know me better than they know the postman.
His hands moved with a calm certainty, shaping wood to hold the living colonies he planned to bring indoors.
They'll keep us warm, boy. A whole wall of them, radiating like a slow furnace.
He painted a red arrow on the wall, a quiet mark for himself, no one else. A farmer saw James carrying a frame, buzzing with bees, and called, half laughing, "You'll be sleeping with them next."
Let them laugh. The bees know more than the whole valley.
For months, he hollowed the south wall, fitting frames with glass panes. By autumn, the wall hummed with a dozen colonies, giving off a strange soft warmth without any fire. The valley chuckled and moved on, leaving James to his madness. They never imagined his madness would become the only warmth left. That autumn, James entered the general store with a jar of his darkest honey, hoping to trade for a new blade.
Well, look who's crawled out of his hive. You expect me to sell to a man who talks to bugs.
Everett leaned forward, his spectacles glinting in the dim light, and let out a wet snort.
It's good honey, Everett. Sweeter than anything your sister ships in from the city.
You can keep that witch's brew. Folks here don't want your bee venom honey.
He shoved the jar back, the label Bellamy's Mad Honey staring up at James. James pocketed the jar and stepped out onto the frozen street where Harrison Cole stood waiting.
You are a danger to this valley, Bellamy. Those bees could swarm and kill someone come winter.
They're behind glass, Cole. They keep to themselves, just like I do.
James walked back to his cabin alone, the hive wall humming a soft answer to the valley's growing silence. 2 winters came and went, mild and forgettable. The valley forgot James Bellamy existed.
Another dozen colonies, Sage. Father swore a wall of hives could heat a cabin better than any iron stove.
His father's journal, yellowed and crumbling, held sketches of ancient bee-warming walls used by farmers across the sea.
They called it superstition, but I know the physics is sound. A winter cluster holds heat like a living ember.
By the 3rd autumn, the south wall pulsed with 20 colonies, radiating a constant, gentle warmth. Then the frost came early. The ground hardened weeks before it should.
Something's wrong. The bees feel it.
The valley paid no mind. To them, Bellamy was still the madman in the woods. James traced the red arrow on the wall, the hum vibrating through his fingertips, and felt a knot in his stomach. The 3rd winter was coming, and it would change everything. The blizzard struck on the 1st of November, tearing a barn apart before anyone could shutter a window. By morning, 4 of Harrison Cole's cattle stood frozen in the south pasture, eyes open like black glass.
20 colonies, Sage. Not one has gone silent. Father was right.
In town, families burned their furniture, fighting to keep a single room above freezing. A timberman crossing the ridge noticed Bellamy's cabin. Almost no chimney smoke. Yet the window glass was bare of frost.
Half the stores will last us till April. Sage, we'll have honey left to trade.
By the 3rd week, even the toughest ponies were found dead in their stables. ice in their lungs, and, in the frozen dark, men began to whisper about the cabin that burned without any fire.
Let them whisper. Their pride will cost them more than a few barrels of kerosene.
James pressed his palm to the warm glass, and the hum of 100,000 bees shook through his bones. In the general store, Everett's voice grew sharper with every frozen body brought down from the ridge.
I am telling you, Bellamy's made a pact. No stove burns that steady without wood. It ain't natural.
By nightfall, a dozen men with lanterns and rifles gathered at the edge of the square. They marched toward the ridge, the orange glow of the cabin, drawing them like a taunting star.
They're coming. The cowards finally found courage in a pack.
Then the wind shifted. A fresh wave of ice hammered the valley, howling like a wounded animal. The storm swallowed the mob whole. Men fell, blinded by snow, crawling back toward the village.
Turn back. We'll finish this when the sky clears.
Inside, James stood by the door, the iron bolt cold against his fingers. Sage whimpered at his feet. He slid the bolt home. The splintering outside was not the storm. It was the sound of a world that had turned against him. 3 days after the mob turned back, Dr. Lyman tightened his scarf and left his frozen surgery behind. A child had already lost fingers that week. The whispers about Bellamy's wall gnawed at his professional curiosity.
Open up, Bellamy. It's Lyman. I am not with the mob.
I didn't hear a single voice of reason among them, Doctor. Why should I trust you?
Because I am freezing, and I need to see if this madness is real.
James stepped aside and led the doctor to the south wall. The warmth was palpable at 6 feet.
A winter cluster of bees holds a steady 90 degrees. 20 colonies through glass, and the wall becomes a slow furnace.
It's not witchcraft, it's biology.
James offered him a spoonful of dark herbal honey, an old recipe he swore could fight infection.
I'll need to study this further, but thank you, Bellamy.
Dr. Lyman trudged through the drifts to the cold cabin that same night, the jar of Bellamy's honey knocking against his medical case.
His lungs are filling, Harrison. Without steady, continuous warmth, your son won't last the month.
We've got a fire. We'll keep it stoked. We don't need anything else.
Not enough. There's only one cabin in this valley that stays warm without burning the furniture, and you know whose it is.
I'll not crawl to that witch man. I'd sooner burn every chair in this house. Margaret stood frozen in the corner, her hand clutching Tom's cold fingers.
Pride is a cold blanket, Harrison Cole, and it's smothering my son.
Mama, hurts.
The doctor left with a grim set of his jaw. Outside, the wind screamed through the bare trees.
He'll die here. Unless I go, I'll walk through hell itself if it saves him.
Dr. Lyman sat at his desk long after midnight, thumbing through a leather-bound volume from his student days. There, in a yellowed woodcut, was a cabin lined with hive frames, captioned in Old German, "Warm House of Bees for Cold Lands."
Bellamy was right. 3 winters of proof, and we nearly burned him out.
He snapped the book shut, pulled on his coat, and forged a path back to the coal cabin. The wind bit like iron. Tom's lips had turned blue. The puddle beneath the window was solid ice.
There's no more time. The fever is spiking. Without Bellamy's wall, he won't see another sunrise.
I said no. I'll not owe that man. The doctor opened the ancient book and held the woodcut before Harrison's face.
This is real. Your pride is killing your son.
But Harrison Cole shook his head, and the sound of his son's rattling breath filled the silence. Margaret watched Harrison's jaw clench. She knew he would not move, would rather bury their son than swallow his pride.
Then I will.
She left a scrap of paper on the cold table, pulled on her thickest boots, and slipped out the back.
Forgive me, Harrison. I am bringing our boy back to life.
The door swung shut behind her, and the blizzard swallowed the cabin whole. She leaned into the wind, each step a battle against a mountain of ice.
Hold on, Tom. Mama's coming with fire and honey.
A gust slammed her to her knees. She screamed, but the storm ate the sound before it left her lips. When she looked back, her trail had vanished. When she looked ahead, a distant amber light pulsed. She stood up and pushed forward, one frozen step after another. She found the frozen iron knocker and struck it once before, collapsing into the snow. Inside, James looked up from his father's journal. Sage raised his head and growled low.
No one sane travels in this. If it's the mob again.
He crossed to the door, the dog's warm body pressed against his leg. He slid the bolt and pulled the door open a hand's width.
Margaret Cole.
Please. My boy Tom is dying. Your wall. The doctor said, it's the only warmth that can save him.
Harrison's wife. The man who called me a witch, and she came alone.
I know what he did, but Tom is just a boy. Please, Bellamy.
James stood in the doorway, the warm hum of the hives spilling past him into the night. He did not step forward. He did not step back.
He's just a boy, and she came through hell for him.
He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around Margaret's shoulders, pulling her into the warmth. The hive wall hummed as James poured hot honeyed tea and pressed the cup into her frozen fingers.
Tell me what the doctor said. Every word.
He said only your wall can keep him alive. Constant warmth and your herbal honey. He'll die before morning if we don't move him.
Then we don't wait. Sage can pull us both on the sled.
James harnessed Sage to the sled in seconds flat, the dog's tail whipping with purpose. He helped Margaret onto the sled, then grabbed his hatchet and a jar of his darkest honey.
Hold on, Tom. Mama's bringing the sun itself.
The amber glow of the cabin shrank behind them, swallowed by the blizzard as they raced toward the valley. The coal cabin rose from the drifts like a black tooth. No smoke, no candlelight. James kicked the door open. Harrison sat slumped beside a dead hearth, his head in his hands.
Tom.
The boy's breathing was a thin whisper. James tore the blankets off and pressed his ear to the tiny chest.
He's still fighting. We move now.
Harrison looked up, his face a ruin of cracked pride and terror. He opened his mouth, but no sound came.
Come or stay. I am not letting the boy die.
James carried Tom out into the blizzard. Harrison stumbled after them, a ghost following a flame. Margaret climbed onto the sled, cradling Tom against her chest. Sage lunged forward, and the runners cut through the powder. The only guide was the amber star pulsing on the ridge, the hum of 100,000 bees calling them home. The runners carved a trench through the last drift to the cabin steps. James lifted Tom as if the boy were made of glass, and Sage barked them inside. The amber wall hit them first, heat like a forge, but soft, breathing, alive. The hum wrapped around them like a mother's song.
Lay him on the cot, as close to the glass as you can.
Margaret laid him down, her cold hands trembling. The heat seeped through the blankets, into his bones.
This honey's from the darkest comb. My father swore it could pull a man back from the brink.
He tilted the honeycomb over the boy's lips, a single golden drop falling like a promise.
Please, Tom. Please fight.
The hum of the hives pulsed through the walls, and the boy's rattling breath began to even out.
The fever's breaking.
For the first time that night, Tom's face was not the color of snow. Harrison stood frozen outside the door, the amber light painting the snow at his feet. He hadn't crossed the threshold. James rose and walked to the open door. He did not speak. He simply pulled the latch wider. Harrison's legs gave way. He dropped to his knees in the snow, the ice biting through his trousers.
Bellamy, I have no right to ask.
Get inside. You are letting the warmth out.
James gripped Harrison's arm and hauled him up. The big man stumbled inside, tears cutting tracks through the frost on his beard. He guided Harrison to the chairs by the wall. The two men sat across from each other, the hum of the hives filling the silence.
You saved my boy. After what I did, after what I said, how can you even look at me?
Because your wife walked through hell to knock on my door. That's all the proof I need.
And in that amber glow, with the storm still howling outside, something shifted, not in the weather, but in the heart of a valley that had nearly frozen its own soul. Dawn bled gray through the frost-rimed windows. The blizzard still screamed outside, but inside, the hive wall hummed its steady, golden note.
Mama, is that honey?
Yes, sweetheart. And you are going to drink every drop.
His color's back, and the rattle in his chest is gone.
A sharp knock cut the air. James opened the door to find Dr. Lyman, frosted from head to foot, his medical bag clutched against the wind.
I came as soon as the wind let up. How's the boy?
Harrison rose and stepped aside, a grateful silence in his posture. The doctor knelt, pressed his stethoscope to Tom's chest, and listened.
Clear lungs, strong pulse. This is impossible without that wall. I'll say it plainly. It was the bee wall that saved him. The warmth, the honey, all of it.
Harrison Cole closed his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, his shoulders lost their bruising tension. By evening, word had slithered down the valley. The bee-man's wall could save a child's life. The first knock came after dark. A farmer with a frost-bitten grandmother, bundled in his arms.
Get her by the wall. Sage, make room.
Then another family, a mother with two coughing toddlers wrapped in the same threadbare quilt. Margaret began boiling tea, and Harrison carried cots from the back room, his silence speaking louder than any of his old words. The cabin filled with breath and murmurs, the hive wall casting its steady amber over them all. A skittish figure appeared in the doorway, Everett Sloane, his spectacles fogged, clutching a sack of flour like a shield.
Bellamy, I didn't know. I brought this. It ain't much.
Put it on the table. There's room by the south corner.
And in that crowded cabin, the mad beekeeper's wall did what the valley's pride never could. It heated a whole community back to life. When the storm finally broke, James Bellamy walked into the general store, Tom Cole's small hand wrapped in his.
A week ago, my son was dying. This man carried him through the blizzard and laid him beside a wall of bees. That wall saved his life.
A crowd gathered, breath clouding in the cold morning air.
I called him a witch. I sent men with torches. Bellamy, I was wrong.
Everett Sloane pulled off his spectacles and wiped them, unable to meet James's eyes.
Fear drove all of us, but the bees just kept working.
Harrison Cole stepped forward, his voice cracking through the silence.
From this day, my door is open to you, Bellamy. My house owes you a debt that can't be counted.
And in that cold street, the valley began to understand that the madman they'd mocked had held ancient wisdom in his hands. The red arrow on his wall was no mark of madness. It pointed toward the truth. On the first warm morning, James opened the small wooden doors he had sealed against the killing cold. Golden bodies spilled out, drunk on the sun, tracing clumsy spirals against the melting snow. A child's laugh rang out. Tom Cole stood watching, eyes bright as he'd never seen them in the sick room.
They're just catching their bearings, Tom. By summer, they'll cover every flower in the valley.
Tom pressed a handful of bruised crocus into James's palm. When James walked the valley road with Sage, even Everett Sloane lifted his hat from his shop door.
Respect instead of torches. That's a fair trade.
The bee wall had kept his cabin warm all winter. Now, the story was warming the valley, and in that spring air, the hum of the hives was no longer a thing of fear, but a song of home. James smiled and kept walking. Sage's tail wagging a steady rhythm beside him. The thaw spread, and so did the story. Dr. Lyman found James at the edge of a newly green pasture, a jar of honey in hand.
Bellamy, I've been reading. This method, it must not be lost. Will you teach it to me? To the valley?
I never kept it secret, Doctor. It's in my father's journal. I'll show you everything.
They walked back to the cabin, where the hive wall still hummed, and James spread his father's notes across the table.
The key is the glass and the orientation. South-facing. The bees do the rest.
It's not just warmth. It's a whole way of living with the land.
A week later, the general store carried a new label, Bellamy's Healing Honey. The shelves emptied in a day.
I've got orders for 3 dozen jars. Never seen anything like it.
And as the bees returned with pollen, children pointed at the red arrow on the cabin wall, knowing now what it meant. It pointed toward the truth. A wall of live beehives had kept his cabin warm all winter, and the whole valley, which had called him mad, was finally beginning to understand. The sunset painted the cabin in gold. James sat on his porch, the hive wall humming behind the glass. Sage's tail thumped once, then stilled. The old dog pressed against his leg, a contented sigh escaping his chest.
They called me mad. The bees just called me home.
He uncapped a jar of the darkest honey. The scent of clover lifted into the still, warm air. A spoonful of it was like swallowing summer. A stray bee danced past his face, heavy with pollen, and disappeared into the wall.
Warmth without fire. It was never madness.
He leaned back, the jar balanced on his knee, and watched the light fade behind the ridge. The hum was the only sound. It was enough. He smiled, and let the evening wrap around him like a slow, golden blanket. The porch now held only the jar, still half full, catching the last light. Inside, the door had clicked shut, leaving the world to its quiet. The tip of Sage's tail gave one final sweep across the wooden planks before the old dog followed James inside. The glass of the hive wall glowed, a deep amber pulse in the settling dark. A single bee crawled across the inside of the pane, tracing the red arrow before folding into the cluster. The hum softened, not silence, but a lullaby the cabin had shared for 3 winters, unbroken. And in that quiet, the ancient secret did not feel like a secret at all, just warmth without fire, just bees doing what they'd always done. A wall of live beehives kept his cabin warm all winter, and the whole valley called him mad until the winter they didn't. The hum faded, the image dimmed to black.